one of the main things that attracts me to your work is the fact that I can see a tremendous amount of compassion and empathy coming through your characters, and that's a quality I find in a great actor like Martin Sheen as well. He just kind of exudes that quality. And I'm curious to know if acting was for you a vessel in which you could channel that feeling of empathy towards others into something creative.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the flattered by your comments, and I'm touched that you're moved by my work, because ultimately one's desire is always that your work can affect people and that it has resonance. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting thing for me because my interest in the cinema was since I was a young boy, sort of implanted, I guess, a seed or a virus in you, and a dream that eventually sort of germinates and kind of takes over your body and your psyche, and it requires you to explore it, and to dedicate yourself to the art form, and not only acting but filmmaking. So it really, that's the way it happened. I can't say it was something that I could say specifically, consciously what it was, but there was a calling, I guess, to the art form that spoke to me, and I just needed to do it. I had no other choice, I'm still extremely stimulated by it, especially when we're under the optimum situation, when you have the freedoms to explore a character, freely, mm-hmm. And the parameters of the work are not too confined. My theory is that you want to give a director as much raw material and options possible in the character. Film is different than theater because in the theater you can you rehearse for a number of weeks and you can have explorations, and from night to night you can continue that process. In film, most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, or even a higher percentage, there is no rehearsal. There is the rehearsal is done on the day as you're doing the scene, basically. So my philosophy is to actually shoot the rehearsal. I always encourage the director to shoot the rehearsal because you never know where those magical moments might happen, And since we have the camera, let's just roll, Yeah. And if you trust the people that you collaborating with in terms of discerning what is organically truthful and what could in service of the material and of the overall story, the best, then you shouldn't be worried about, being under-rehearsed, or you're prepared to play the part. You have to come in prepared to play the part, and then the exploration begins, and you want to document the entire exploration. That was something I learned very early on from Hal Ashby, and he was very experimental, and he would always just shoot everything, and you would do a take, and he would just say, we never really judged anything. He would just say, well, that was interesting, we got that, try something else.
And I am crazy about Hal Ashby. We've done a tribute show to him.
Me too.
In years past. And I mean, that was one of your first directors. And I think the best directors, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, they create a comfort zone where you feel comfortable enough to maybe fall on your face and it's okay.
Absolutely. You have to be willing to fall on your face. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they do. It's not a place really to judge, for me, and that's, again, having that experience with Hal was very early on, and Jeff Bridges, that was instilled in me as the way he worked as a film director, and it's not a place of judgment, it's a place of gathering, mm-hmm. a place of exploration. Judgment comes in the editing room when you're looking at the material and judging what pieces work best for the film and what pieces have more resonance than others. And there are many times, and it's happened to me often, where something happens in a scene that wasn't pre-designed, but it just kind of happens, and the director kind of goes, let's do one, let's not, I don't know, I'm not sure about that. And I said, well, it's not something I designed, it just happened. And they said, okay, but we, kind of like he already sort of has passed kind of judgment that it's not what he wants, it's not going to work. And then when you see the movie, that's exactly the take that's in the movie. Because there's a subconscious that's going on. The movie has a subconscious, and you have a subconscious connection to it, and the character begins to speak for itself in that world, And so it's hard. Sometimes it seems a little bit obscure or askew from what you intellectually are processing as a director or something. But then it becomes exactly what that beat needed or the movie needed at the time,
Well, that speaks to a delicacy of the craft of acting, I think, is that you do your homework, you prepare, and how you break away from that and then let instinct take over.
Sure, of course.
It must be a challenge.
Well, it's part of the craft, and when the craft meets inspiration, then it becomes an art form,
Yeah,
you can hit those notes that goes beyond just the craft. So yes, you have to be completely free. You do all the homework you can, and you prepare the character, and you know the objectives and the story and everything. So even if you're improvising within the context of the character, who he is, and how he fits into the story, and how the scene specifically fits into the story.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask one more thing about Mr. Ashby. What did we miss by not having an Ashby cut of 8 Million Ways to Die?
Well, you saw the raw material that he created, but he never edited the film at all. There was a lot of explorations we were doing. For example, Jeff Bridges' character was a recovering alcoholic who had, fallen back into it. And one night, after the end of the day's work, which, again, we were improvising a lot of our scenes, and at the end of the day, he goes, I want to try something. And he set up an improvisation that was not even a scripted scene in the movie or a scripted beat in the movie. And it was a scene between myself and Randy Brooks and Alexandra Paul, who was the girl that I had killed in the film. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the first one we did. And, Jeff was doing some subsequent to that, too. And then me and Jeff did some. But that one with the Alexandra Paul was, like, in the middle of the room, and me and Randy were, like, celebrating around her, and she was just standing still looking at the camera. And then I came up to her, and I was taking petals off of a white rose I had in my lapel, and licking them and pasting them on her face, like Tar Baby almost, And he was drinking champagne, and it was just kind of like a little crazy improvisation. And when we finished, I remember Hal said to me, he said, I found my movie. And what he was trying to do is, what he felt was, and then we started doing this improvisations, kind of either me or Jeff and Rosanna, or different characters interrelating in a way that was basically Jeff's sort of like blackout alcoholic mind, what was going on in his head, to flash into his world, so that the movie was going to have a certain like dual parallel story to it, sort of like the linear story and Jeff's mind, his blackout mind, We tried to communicate that to the producers and the editors and stuff like that, but they didn't. They basically cut the movie with the linear material that they had, and of course the raw material that Hal had created with us. So the movie has that energy that Hal created, but it's ultimately not truly a Hal Ashby film or cut, But it has his spirit, And
absolutely.
that spirit was in how he let his actors, go into that exploration, and how he would, sort of usher us through it, And like you said, he was a great encourager of discovery, and he would always embrace the unknown,
Mm-hmm. We did a show also a couple of years ago on my favorite film and performance of yours, Night Falls in Manhattan.
Yes.
And did Lumet work in a similar way?
No,
like a theater
just the opposite. I mean, Sidney, what he would do, and if you read his book, it's pretty much exactly word for word as you would read his book. But he goes into like a 2-week rehearsal process in which he goes into a Ukrainian hall in Lower East Side, I believe it was, and he had all the locations mapped out with tape on the ground, very large like hall, social hall, and we started day one of the first week. We read the material, then we'd have lunch, Then he said, okay, let's read it again. Now we can stop. Anybody who wants to stop and talk about anything, we can discuss. And he had the whole principal cast there of the film, which was Ian Holm and Lena Olin and James Gandolfini, myself, Dreyfus,
Colin Fior and Ron Liebman and
Liebman. That's Ronnie.
What a cast!
I'm looking at his face. I'm going, Ronnie. Why am I forgetting Ron Liebman? How could I forget Ronnie? So he and these are extraordinary actors, and then we started to kind of ask questions, and then the next day we got on our feet with a book in hand, and we go through the scenes, and we just run through the piece like a play twice a day. And he would, once we were on our feet, he would talk about it. If he saw something happen that he liked, he would say, mark that, I like that. And then by the second week, he said, I want you guys off book. So he approached it like a play, and then he was making decisions visually what he wanted to do with the film. And then once you went and you started shooting, he always has this tradition, as he said in the book, like the first shot we did was an exterior shot of me walking into it's at the beginning of the movie, me walking into the police station. It's an exterior shot with taxi cabs and all that in New York. And it was 8 o'clock in the morning, and the set was ready. I got on there, a cab pulled up, and I walked out. Walked into the police station. He yelled cut, and it was a company move. Immediately we moved to another side of the city, which is very rare. You usually make those moves in the middle of the day during lunch,
Mm-hmm.
But he says that establishes for him a certain pace. And he shot the coverage. Sometimes in a scene he would only do a wide shot, and then that's it. And sometimes he would just do two over the shoulders, or he already had the movie mapped out in his mind what he wanted. And I would say about 95% of the movie was done only in one take.
Wow.
Very rarely would he ask for a second. And when the first time I asked for a second take, he told me, I don't need a kid. And I said, well, Sidney, I really felt, it was kind of, I think I could give you something better. And he said, okay. And I did it. And he said, you were right. Print that one. And he walked away.
Wow.
So he was but he had no monitors or anything. He was right there off camera looking at you, and he knew what he wanted. And his movies, now I look back at all his films, and they're all very similar in that way,
Yeah. And such an extraordinary cast in that film, and one of your cast members was just an exceptional James Gandolfini.
Absolutely, yes.
In that film. What was the experience? Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. What was the experience of being in his company?
Well, James, I didn't know, but I knew of his work because I had seen his work in True Romance and some of the early work he had been doing. And when I heard he was cast in it, because I was one of the first guys on board on the film, being the protagonist, and I was very excited because I already was a fan of his work. I was from a fellow actor that I admired tremendously. James was the James that the world got to know. He was an extremely organic and deep-rooted and an emotional actor, a very warm-hearted, sort of a teddy bear of a man that you wanted to, embrace, and that you knew there was joy and dignity, but also pain and anger. He was a very, full actor. He could do absolutely anything. He could play that guy in Night Falls, but he could also play Othello. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's one of those actors who just had an extraordinary sense of truth in his work, which is what I admired so much. And we got on very well. But he was. I always felt that he was painfully shy.
Yeah.
And I kind of said, come on, and we'd go. We'd go to lunch. Because we're sitting in the city, so instead of going to catering, we'd go to lunch. We'd walk around to a local restaurant, and we sit down and and have a chat. But I could tell that he was very, like very private, in a way, very shy.
Mm-hmm.
But I have nothing but the warmest, fondest memories of that. And subsequently we would see each other occasionally because of run into each other, and immediately I would get my bear hug was just slightly smaller than his bear hug because of his size, But it was always that warm reception and camaraderie and kind of stimulating the memories that we had together, and I had a great privilege of we're not only working with him but considering him a friend.
Mr. De Palma is a good friend to our show.
Oh yeah.
And The Untouchables being an early film of yours as well. I mean,
yes.
He is a director that so visually immaculate, and I would imagine it gave you a lesson in how to perform for camera, your relationship to the camera. Did you get that from that project?
Well, from the get-go, I've always, like I said to you earlier, I was always interested. Even I moved to Los Angeles in '78 with the dream of acting in films, because I was always interested in films, not only as an actor but as a filmmaker. I never went to film school, but I was just interested, in the concept. So when I've got a chance to begin to work with some of these great directors, it became such it's like a master class for me. So I was always the actor that was hanging around watching how it's done and what was being done, And with Brian, of course, being there in most of those sequences, you see him work and how he breaks down his sequences and how he plans them out, and that was a great learning experience, as was with Hal, which was before that, which was completely free, and I come from an improvisational background, so I saw how he got to those other movies that I had so cherished before, whether it be, Being There or Coming Home or The Last Detail or, Harold and Maude and Landlord and all those great films he made, and I said, I see now where he got those moments, because the actors, he trusted his actors so much and he gave them so much freedom of space to explore. So all these people, to me, began to sort of, later on, of course, with Francis and with Ridley Scott, I would always go to dailies, not so much with Brian, but later on with the other directors I had a chance to work with, whether it would be Ridley or Francis. I was always in dailies. I'd go to the cutting rooms. I was learning the process because I had a real genuine interest in it. So you'd be foolish if you have interest in the filmmaking process and to make films. You'd be foolish not to take advantage of the situation you're in.
Right. Have you seen Ashby's cut of Looking to Get Out?
Yes, I have.
Isn't it stunning? I mean, that was such a
discovery. Yes, I have, because my dear friend of it was in there, Richard Bradford, who I've worked in many movies together, who played just sort of the antagonist of the film,
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I talked to him a lot about Looking to Get Out and what happened to it and all that stuff. But again, that movie was the same. I talked a lot to Richard about the process of that and what and it was the same. And even Being There, which seems like such a precise film, I talked to Hal a lot about Being There because I think it's one of the greatest movies ever made. And I thought that movie was very precise in its construction. I said, "Do you guys improvise a lot?" And he said, "Oh yeah, absolutely." He said, after Peter Sellers, about 2 weeks into the movie, he really had the character in his mind that it was fantastic. And then Hal told me that he would improvise and he would come up with these things, and then everyone around him, Shirley MacLaine and Jack Ward and all the actors that were, Melvin Douglas, whatever he would do, they would just justify it as the profound truth. And so it became, and then he said that Peter wanted to go back and reshoot the first 2 weeks because he felt he had kind of really locked in 2 weeks into the show, and Hal showed him some footage. He goes, no, you were there from day one, And but he did tell me a fantastic story about how he came up with the idea of the end of the movie where he walks on water. He told me that he was cutting the film, and originally the film ended in the funeral, and he would walk off, if I remember correctly, and then I guess Shirley MacLaine's character would find him. He goes, where'd you go, John? See, I've been looking all over for you. And he just looks at her and said, "I've been looking for you too, Eve." And the movie would end. But then he said that Robert Jones, the writer-editor, a friend of his, called him and said, "How's the movie going?" And he said, "Oh, it's fantastic." And he said, that's what he told me. He said Peter would do these things. He was telling Robert that Peter would do these things, and the cast would just justify it as the profound truth, and we would just go on, these kind of crazy things would happen. And he said he could have done anything. He could have walked on water, and they would have bought it. And he said that at that moment, he said to Robert, he said, "Wait a second, I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. And then he called, and this is exactly from Hal's words, what he told me. He said he called Robert Downey Sr., and he said, who had made that movie, Putney, is it Swoop or Swope? I never know how to pronounce that. And he said, Robert, I have this idea in the movie of what I want to have Peter walk on the water, and apparently he used that in his film, and I just want to know if I can borrow that. And apparently Robert said to him, that's not mine, Hal, that's from the Bible. So he said they went back, and Michael Haller, who also worked with us on Emily, was a production designer, put some snow on the ground, and they went back to that thing, and they built that ramp, and they had him walk out, on the water, and tie it into what they had. They already had shot him walking around and, looking at the little pine trees that were growing, and then he just tagged on this ending, and that was it,
A remarkable ending. My creative idol is Al Pacino, and I remember you were interviewed once, and you were asked, give me one word to describe Pacino, and you said artist. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what about what he does kind of transcends it into the realm of art for you?
Well, first of all, he, to me, he is cut from the cloth of, people who have dedicated their entire life from a very early age to the art form and the dedication to an art form, So when I say artist, I say, I kind of see him as someone who's also, sort of like a mid-century painter, you know what I mean? Who, even if he didn't have anybody was buying his paintings, he'd still be painting, If Al wasn't the famous Al Pacino, he'd still be in a coffee shop, doing Shakespearean monologues,
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I think he's just a consummate artist, and very dedicated to his work. I mean, he likes to rehearse, he likes to get together, he likes to talk about it, he likes to work. He's the real thing, So he's been a great inspiration to me also, And aside from getting the opportunity, obviously, to work with him was a great privilege and a great joy.
My last question for you: you're a fantastic director, and as well, and I want to know if you're anxious to get back in the director's seat.
Yes, I have a movie I wrote with Ernest Hemingway's niece, Hillary Hemingway, that I'm in the process of completing the financing on, called Hemingway and Fuentes, about the relationship between Hemingway and the captain of his boat, Gregorio Fuentes, the last 20 years of his life, and his wife, Mary Welsh, and Dejan Ivancic, which was a young muse. It's basically around the last 10 years of his life in Cuba. So we're just kind of gathering all our ducks in